now. We are recording.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to call the Texas Charters Board meeting to order. Today is Friday, February 12th, 2021. A quorum is present and all board members are present in addition to staff members of Responsive Education Solutions. And the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting was posted as required by law.
Well, thank
So
y'all for joining.
7 minutes, sorry.
Thank y'all for joining and taking time to be on this call for this board meeting. First thing is public comment. Sarah or Michelle, do we have anybody here for public comment? I do not have my screens up for Michelle. Do we have anybody? Okay. So we do not have anybody here, and if it's okay, then we will start with the presentation of the TAPER report, which is the Texas Academic Performance Report, and Dr. Cutter is going to present the TAPER for 2019-2020.
Good morning and happy Friday. So this is an annual report we give. It comes out a public document from the state. The Texas Academic Performance Report captures a lot of the data that's available through a variety of sources and puts it into one place. You will notice that of the elements that are within it, we're going to be subject to a lot of missing and absent information for this year. So as we look at the next slide, you'll see that one of the first things on it is student success. Unfortunately, that is generated by test scores that are taken through STAR and EOCs. We do not have any data to report from last year because COVID caused us to put students in remote learning situations where the test was not available. Now, down the road, we will actually be able to give the test more remotely, but not predicted by TEA until 22-23. Second piece on that is English language learners. A lot of the data from this is also generated by a TELPAS examination that was not given in the fall. So we do not have any relatable data that's new compared to the last time we talked about the TAPER report. The third piece is attendance. Now, we do have attendance data, and if we go through a couple of slides forward, you will see that attendance is basically geared 4 different ways, causing the attendance data to be somewhat unreliable. And I will leave that to your discretion, but I did want to give you a clear picture on how that has looked. So for a remote learner, which all of our students, 100% were from the end of March through the end of last school year, attendance was taken in one of 4 ways. All right. The first way was that a student could be online with the teacher in a virtual environment on that day. A lot of our students did their learning that way, and we still have students right now learning at the same time at home as we have students in school. But for last year, remember, from March to, June, we had only remote learners. So a teacher would take attendance based on their kids logging in and being on the screen, and they would actually do roll call and kids would say present. So that was one way a student could be marked as present. The second way was that a student could submit work that day. That showed that they had done some work and they submitted it. So a teacher would mark them as engaged, or in this case, synonymous with present, and their attendance would be given for that day. The third way is a student may come on and do a test virtually. They could be engaged in some sort of assessment or take a quiz, and a teacher could mark them as present. Now, if a student didn't do any of those 3 things, we were asking either the teacher or a designee to reach out to that student. Students were then marked present if the teacher determined that the student was doing work that was equivalent to a day's effort. Now you can see a lot of this goes from actually being there to subjective. And that's why when we look at our attendance data, which is in line with attendance in the past, we don't have any way to actually justify whether or not the engagement truly did equal attendance, which is the measure. I call that out just so you guys, when you're looking at it, you can scrutinize it through this lens in a way that you feel is appropriate. We are continuing with this same 4 elements of engagement to mark our current remote students as present. We don't have data yet on whether or not students are looking like they're doing well or not doing as well, but since we've had a little bit of time over the past year now, almost, to work with students in remote learning, we have put things in place that are actually increasing communication with students, really having those difficult conversations about coming back and getting back into the building. We have an element of people that are still feeling like that's not the safest thing. So there will continue to be remote learners for as long as parents are not either required to come back or don't feel that there's enough precautions, even with the current research about schools being a safe and non-super spreader environment. Until that day, we're going to have these remote learners, and until they change it, this is going to be our criteria for taking their attendance. All right, moving on. Now, the last 2 pieces of this TAPER report do have readily available new data that's published. Unfortunately, it's not new data to us because the high school completion rates are 1 year old. They are the high school data from 2019, not our 2020 graduates from last summer. And the second piece, these indicators of college, career, and military readiness, sadly, this is even older data. This is from 2018. So I did want to give you the language. TA has published the statement on the very bottom here, just basically saying that we weren't going to have a whole lot of new data because of COVID.
And Christian, let me see if I can share. Let me click on this remote control and I'm going to give you access. So see if you can click when you need to and I'll watch. If not, I'll keep clicking.
All right, let's give it that. Top left corner, you see 2018-2019 Texas Academic Report. I've given you the screenshot of the cover of the one from 2 years ago and the one from last year. The one thing that I would point out, no, I don't think I can actually advance it, sorry.
Okay.
The one thing I would point out is in 2019, as a district, we got an accountability rating of a B. Of course, because we don't have any new data, they have decided to use the language not rated, declared as a state of disaster. You will see that on every district's and schools grading report for the 2020 TAPER. The other piece, second there, is last year they added the special ed determination status. We met requirements. Because this is a compliance-driven measurement, did we submit our reports? Were they on time? Were they completed correctly? They can count that data. They can say and measure whether or not we did. And of course, we did for both districts. So the one thing that's new at the very bottom there is the ASVAB is a test for students that are considering going into the military. That moving forward is going to be something that our students are going to have to take in order to demonstrate that they are truly interested in going into the military and thus get college, career, military readiness credit. All right, we can move forward now. So since we do have a little data I can talk about that is in the TAPER report that was published, CCMR is an evolving measure in our state. It used to be you had to take a class, then you had to take a series of classes. That's where this report is measuring. We are now going to industry-based certifications, which is number 13 on this list. That is going to be how students are going to be able to show that they're ready for either a career, college, or military. They are broken up kind of into two groups. If we go to the next tab, you will see that 1 through 7 side. Those are the tests we take generally in our high schools. The SAT, ACT, you know, this TSI for reading and math. Students get a point in CCMR if they just get that minimum score, which I put in the parentheses, on any combination of reading and math of those tests. They don't even have to be the same test. What's really nice is starting last year, which we didn't get a chance to take advantage of, is House Bill 3 reimburses us for the first time costs starting in the spring year of our juniors, for our juniors. So we actually will not incur a cost, or the students won't incur a separate cost for the first time they take it. Now, I don't know how you guys remember ACT and SAT, but it's one of those tests that you can actually take over and over and over again until you get a great test. Although House Bill 3 will pay for the first time test, if a student chooses to take it again, that would be at their own cost. So, and that's all I think on the next slide is all I was saying. Now for TCPA, you know, we have graduates with our CCMR credits from 2019. You will see a couple of nice trends, right? Dual credit is increasing. That's something we like to see. Associate's degrees, those are increasing. I think Dr. Fellers, our in-house statistician, would say that the differences between CTE and our military are probably just the differences between one graduating class and another. It's not truly showing a trend yet, although it's always nice to see it when it goes up. The other thing we are always interested in making sure that we're taking a look at is meeting all the needs of all our special populations, disaggregating the data in such a way that we can tell some of our students that are in SPED, economically disadvantaged, taking English language lesson learners at risk, that sort of thing. This is TCPA, so this kind of gives you a sense of our population that mirrors our enrollment. Again, it's pretty stable. Stable in this situation is good. Moving to the next slide. Now, of all the things that we can show, and without having current data, there are some really great things we can celebrate from the TCPA report that we didn't just pull out through other means. If you look at page 15 of the report, our four-year graduation rate is increasing. It's actually very high. If you look at page 19, those students that are deemed college ready, not only are we as a district well above the state average, but we are showing an upward trend as well. The last thing I'd point out is on page 22, you'd find that, you know, the kids that are taking the SATs, not only are we above the states, and not only are we showing a positive trend where the state has shown a negative trend in data, is that our scores at, you know, 1150 is considered very good. So, and that's our average. So that's very informative. That's very positive.
And Dr. Cutter, college ready, what is the criteria for that? Is it STAR results, EOC results, as well as SAT, ACT?
It's any of those. Are they CCMR ready? Are they doing those tests that are at those minimum levels? So it's all that previous data combined. It's not just getting one of those things, it's any kid who gets any one of those things. And according to that measurement, 83% of our TCPA students are.
Versus 53 for the state.
Correct. I wanted to show you the same data from our PHS schools because, of course, our PH schools serve a different age group and a different population. You will see dual credits. We'd love to see them be taking more dual credit, CTE and military. One thing I wanted to include on this slide is you see right now we have no data on associate's degrees. This is going to change. We have, thanks to the incredible efforts of Robert Riggs, who's our superintendent of our Quest Collegiate Model, and one of his regional directors, a gentleman named Kevin Seven, we've negotiated a contract with Lone Star College to serve higher ed possibilities for all our students, including our PHS students. So where the opportunity was so dependent situationally, where you were located for those students, now we can serve them all over the state. So dual credit associate's degrees, we imagine starting, and it won't be in the taper report for like 3 years, but I will be reporting to you guys that before then, this is going to see an improvement, which is something that's very exciting. I include this slide too, because within our special populations for PHS, this is very representative of the students we serve, which we want that to be the case. For your own reference, you may access these digitally. We can get you hard copies if you would prefer. If you do go online to this website, you just need our student code, which is not a secret. It's just those numbers. You can pull it up by district and look at these from your personal device or laptop computer or whatever at any time. Unfortunately, without new data this year, there's not a whole lot to talk about with the taper report, but I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Cutter. And in your board notebook, let me pull this back over here. Board notebook, thank you, Sarah, for putting this together. Board notebook, you can see we've got links, we've got the agenda, but you can go and you can actually see the taper report that you would pull off of TEA's website is built into the board notebook.
I'm sorry, I had one question. It took me a second to get off mute, but so I see where you get credits for military preparedness. Within the schools, do we have any ROTC programs? Do any of the students participate in ROTC?
We don't have them on our campuses themselves. I don't know if we have any relationships with local districts where they can participate. Dr. Cutter, if you know anything else on top of that, feel free to chime in.
No, not that I'm aware of.
It's just that the premieres are so small, with probably averaging about 20 to 30 seniors. But as the TCPAs grow size-wise, 300-400 kids in high school, we would expect to see that ROTC in those schools.
Oh, all right.
We've had a lot. We've had several of our founders graduates go off to military academies, Naval, West Point, Coast Guard Academy.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Cutter? And Dr. Cutter, we have a confirmation that we will not receive a rating again this year. You want to talk about how we're required to test kids this year?
So as I stated briefly when I was talking about the results, they are moving to doing 100% online testing. They are not at that point yet. So although we can provide the assessments through a computer, but only on site. They have to be proctored. They have to be monitored by somebody who's been trained. That does not allow anybody who's doing remote learning to do the test from home. We are, as early as an article we were reading this morning, we are under the impression that we will not be able to even consider that until the year 2022-23. That means that this year we will be providing STAR tests for 3rd through 8 EOCs for those high school end of class, end of course credits in person, requiring parents to, even if they have remote learners, to take advantage of state testing by bringing their students to a scheduled time and place at a school or a local place that we've rented out to be conscious of social distancing. Right now, there isn't a mandate that any parent is required to bring their student to school if they've been a remote learner to do the testing. We're not sure that there will be. We're just kind of staying tuned. But the expectation is if your student is in school right now and is an in-person learner, that they will take the test.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board about the taper?
No, it's a good report. Thank you for the info.
All right, so we're going to end the presentation at the taper, and we're going to move into executive report. I want to show you a couple of videos I am cognizant of, and I am glad that you are asking for. A couple of you have said through the years, you know, we spend a lot of time on just financial things, building buildings, which is one of the main duties of the board, is approving those large expenditures. But prior to COVID, we had talked about we're going to have students come in, some staff. We're going to get some, you know, insight from what they're experiencing, testimonies. So with COVID, we're adapting a little, and we're going to show you some videos. So I know you've seen the Granbury flyover, but this one is the actual grand opening. And then I want to show you a quick clip about Capturing Kids' Hearts, a program we've rolled out in the premieres the last couple of years. So Sarah, let me know if you can't hear this. It sounded like it worked earlier. And I am going to leave it this size because we were having some technical difficulties when we went large screen a second ago.
This is really very, very exciting. And looking at locations, Granbury is the perfect place to put our first premier high school. And today it was so great because I got to introduce the staff to our building.
This is overwhelming. I'm hoping that this is the future.
For the education of our students, for their sense of worth and pride, it is going to be exponential for our students.
Because, you know, we've always been proud of the program, but now they can be proud of the building too.
And so our kids have never had a cafeteria, they've never had a gym, and they've really never had any ownership to anything other than the 6 classrooms. They are so excited about having their own building in their own school.
I hope I'm standing in the future of Premier High School.
God's timing is perfect, and this is the perfect timing for Premier High School. And our community wins, our kids win, and our country wins.
They are excited, as you can imagine. We're excited for them. I have not seen a dropout recovery school. I'm sure there's something that's been built somewhere across the country, but in California, a similar type of system is Premier, Learn for Life. They don't have any buildings they've built, and they've got, you know, 20,000 kids. So this is the first one we know of, and it's very impressive. This cost a little over $4 million, Robert, like 4.5, is that right?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Yes.
So thank you guys for your approvals on building buildings like this, and you can see the smiling faces there of the staff, and now we've seen that with kids, even in the middle of COVID. So pretty impressive. Good job to Robert and his team and getting this thing built out. Let me show you another quick video. I think this one is 2 minutes. And this is about capturing kids' hearts in our premier high schools.
My name is Brandon Ward. I'm a sophomore at the New Braunfels Premier High School, and I'm the student council president. This year, Premier implemented a new program called Capturing Kids' Hearts. It seeks to engage the students and develop the relationships. As the student council president, I have a unique perspective on how the program works within the classroom and how it works throughout the entire school. We started the year and we implemented Capturing Kids' Hearts by playing various icebreaker games. This was to build camaraderie as a class and get to know each other. It proved very beneficial and helped start the year off right. After a few weeks into the school year, we worked together as teams and then as a larger group to create our social contract. And our social contract serves as a guideline on how we're supposed to treat each other and how we want to be treated by our teacher. On a daily basis, the program is showcased through our teacher shaking our hands to promote professionalism and through our teacher holding morning discussions where we share good news that might have happened to us over the previous night. Capturing Kids' Hearts has improved the student-teacher dynamic. Both parties better understand each other and are more considerate towards their life outside of school. Furthermore, the program has built a sense of community and a sense of belonging. Both the faculty and the students are participating in our school-wide events. For example, in November, we held a food drive where we raised over 200 pounds of canned goods for the local food bank. I'm excited to see how the program grows and how it continues to better our school. For me personally, the program has helped me relate to my fellow peers and connect with them on a more personal level. While it's only been inactive for a semester, Capturing Kids' Hearts has already proven itself to be an outstanding program, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds.
Very articulate young man. And that program is going very well. As you can see, this was, well, hopefully you understood this was pre-COVID, shaking hands, no masks. So it has gone very well going into its second year. Again, hurdles with COVID. And I was talking to somebody earlier in the meeting, before the meeting began, about the percentage of kids on site. In the premieres, it's running 10 to 15% are coming on site. So we're looking forward to getting more kids back on campus. And as I talk to teachers on the premier side, they are thrilled with this program. It gets back to the heart of the matter, why you're in public education. It's not about just teaching content. It's about these young hearts and, as it says, capturing them and loving kids. So we will bring some teachers in at some point and let you hear from them and get their testimony on this program. So I wanted to start giving you some exciting news of things that are going on with our premier high schools and all of our schools. Now we're going to turn to COVID-19 and give you a status, an update on where we're at and our response to the health and safety of students and staff. So Lonnie Morgan, I'm looking for Lonnie. There you are, Lonnie. Just let me know. I'll control the PowerPoint again, but thank you for being here, Lonnie. Thank you for your leadership and your team. I'm sure you're going to introduce the newest member to your team to the board, but let me know. I'm going to click on this first slide and let me know when you want me to click further.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for letting me come on and give an update on where we're at with COVID as far as the district, both here in Texas and Arkansas. My first slide combines the numbers that we've experienced both in the two states. I've previously discussed that we were able to quickly assess whenever I took over the response where we were at, the types of tools that we needed, and was given very quick access to the ability to start developing some things that I felt were necessary. One of which was some way of tracking the amount of data that was going to be collected. Quite frankly, I don't think I could have ever imagined that it would be as large as it is, but in fact, the tool that we created with Smartsheet has proven itself. So what you're seeing now is the culmination of being able to collect all this data, which literally comes to me, I would say 24/7, pretty much. I'm getting responses back all day long, every day, even on the weekends. So our response tool allows us to be able to collect actual real live data and not just have anecdotal evidence. And so what you're seeing here is very specific information that's collected through this tool. To date, when I collected this data and started putting it together, this was as of Tuesday of this week. We had 773 positive cases. Of those, 730 of those were in Texas, 43 in Arkansas. So far, we've taken in 578 forms that we have the nurses and the staff on the campuses fill out, which ultimately lead to either a 7, a 10, or 14-day quarantine protocol. Something that happened since our last meeting was that the TEA adopted new CDC guidelines for allowing people to get back to campus quicker. When we first started, the recommendation was that a person who is symptomatic and tests positive go away for 10 days, test negative 2 times in a row, or get a letter from the doctor before they come back. Someone who had been identified as exposed would spend 14 days from the first day of exposure. If in fact they never developed any symptoms, they could come back on day 15. The CDC and the TEA recognized that these guidelines were putting undue hardship on various families who their students were being required to stay out for these amounts of time, many of which never developed any symptoms. But then also there were communities where testing wasn't as available as others. And so you had communities where either the person couldn't get a test to come back, or the doctor wouldn't allow the person who was symptomatic or had identified themselves as exposed to come into their office. Therefore, you had these people who were kind of just stuck in no man's land, who couldn't get a test to come back or a doctor. So, and then also there were communities where maybe pre-testing wasn't available like it is in the larger metropolitan areas. And so these families were forced to pay potentially twice for the first test, which tested positive, and then a second test that tested negative. So they've changed it to 7, 10, and 14. 7 meaning that a person who's been exposed after 7 days could take a test and come back on day 8 if they still were not showing any symptoms and appeared healthy. A 10-day quarantine could be the option, and any of these 3 can be selected by the person who was identified as exposed. A 10-day is after 10 days, if they still were asymptomatic, they could come back on day 11 without any test at all. And day 14, which they still recommend as the most safe, means that a person could just go away that had been identified as exposed for 14 days and return on day 15, provided they're still not showing any symptoms. So in Texas, specific, we've had 259 positive cases. Of those that were staff, and I'm going to bring up some notes, 259 positive cases that were staff, 471 of them positive student cases. We've been able, through our tool, to be able to identify that of those, 58 of those infections happened on campus. 25 staff were infected on campus, with the other roughly 24 happening off campus. 33 students have been identified as having been infected on campus, with the other 438 happening off campus. So one of the things this identifies for us is that our protocols that we have in place are working, that more often than not a person is going to be infected off campus rather than on. To date, in Texas, we've taken in 5,032 assessment e-forms. This identifies someone who is either experiencing symptoms, either on campus or off, or they've been identified as exposed. The reason we track every exposure is because there could be the possibility that an exposure could, in some point in time, develop into a positive case. Our data does show us that 14.5% of the reported exposures ultimately result in a positive, though that number looks maybe large, and it might not look like it matches up with my 58 on campuses. Many of those exposures happen off campus as well. So even these are tracking both exposures that happen on the campus, but then also those that happen in the home, church, various places. But we track every one of those locations, so we can kind of get a trend as to where the students are developing or being exposed, the most likely places. So 4,302 of the staff and students who had been identified exposed never actually developed the virus. And those are also people on campus, and I'm going to mention this because it's going to be important later in my information. Of that is also people who've experienced symptoms or stated they have symptoms while they've been on campus, still never developed a virus as well. So we have a game changer that has happened to us in the last month and a half, and that was the launching of the BioNext Now on-campus antigen test, which started on January 4th. We're doing that in partnership with the Texas Department of Emergency Management, Abbott Labs. So we've also established a 1-800 number because we felt like that the nurses and leadership on the campuses may need some additional hand-holding when all this starts to happen. And so far, we've had, I think it's 90.3% of our campuses have started testing. A few of them have very few students on campus, and that's why we don't have 100%. But of the 90%, some of them, especially the first time they may test someone on campus, there may be a bit of anxiety. So we placed an in-office testing coordinator, Jamie Hernandez, and created a new 800 line that she monitors that allows us to give the teachers or the staff, oftentimes it's office or maybe the nurses, the ability to call in and ask some questions if they need some additional information about the actual process of administering the test. She could give them some information too. But today we've trained over 200 nurses, staff, and leadership on how to administer the antigen test on campus. To date, or as of Tuesday, we had conducted 416 tests. Of those, 170 were staff, 246 were students. This all started on the 4th of January, which was perfect timing because one of the things that we had anticipated coming out of Christmas and New Year's would be something similar that we experienced right after Thanksgiving, which was after the students and staff were away for a week and interacting with family and friends, somewhere between 5 and 7 days of returning back to school, we saw an uptick in the number of people who either identified themselves as exposed because family members they had been around had suddenly developed the symptoms, or they started developing the symptoms themselves. So coming out of Christmas and New Year's, we anticipated that we would see that in greater numbers than we did during Thanksgiving, which actually proved to be true. So by having these tests launched on that first day back has been a great tool for us to be able to identify exactly what we're dealing with on each individual campus. Of the 416 tests that we've administered, 21 have been positive, roughly about 1 in 20, which has been surprising. Of those, 7 were staff and 14 were students. And the reason I say it was surprising is because these are 416 people who are symptomatic because the particular test that we administer, it's greatly stressed that you don't test anyone who's not symptomatic. Otherwise, the accuracy rate drops dramatically. So these are 416 people who previously would have immediately been isolated and put into quarantine protocol. Of those 416, 395 proved negative. And these are all people who previously would have been out. Now we're able to do a few things. Number one, we know for sure this person, or feel very confident this person is in fact not COVID. They have the flu, they have something, and oftentimes they're still sent home until they're able to come back safely and healthy. But it also alleviates the amount of that anxiety that happens from people when they believe they've been exposed on the campus. Thirdly, it saves a lot of resources and time, which previously would have launched into positive close contact tracing to determine who in fact had been around this person. So those are all aspects that now we're able to address very quickly with the new test. And then finally, one of the things that we launched, we had developed a dashboard online and a COVID page so that the outside world could look at ResponsiveEd's website and look and see the data that we were collecting. But we didn't have a live dashboard. And so we now have developed that so that it allows for parents, various people who want to know what's going on at ResponsiveEd. It allows us to be open and transparent to the world as to what's going on. And that's, I hear back quite often about the activity on our campuses, and even our own staff have appreciated the fact that now they don't have to rely strictly on what they're being told on campus. They're able to go in here and look at real live data per campus, compare their campus with others, and then also just to feel better about what's going on the campus, because there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of, where people are being infected and, the safety and the health of our campuses.
Thank you, Lonnie. Appreciate it. Board, do you have any questions for Lonnie? He has done an outstanding job and we appreciate your leadership. in
Yeah,
making sure we're tracking this right and doing our best to keep our kids and staff safe.
yeah, the only thing is it's a very thorough report, and thanks. It's interesting. If I understood it correctly, you're self-administering, or is it a nurse or somebody just trained to give the test?
Good question. One of the things that the state offered to us was this Finex Now certification, and you didn't have to be a medical professional to go through the certification. The testing, which is very similar to like a pregnancy test. In fact, it's a small kit. You take the swab from the kit, and if the person is not comfortable with you actually administering it to them yourself, as this trained certified person, you can walk that person through it themselves. And it's not the deep test, nasal test. It's one where it's just slightly inside the nasal canal. And so the person who's trained will offer either to test them or to walk them through the test. And at that point, they put it in just like a little tester, and we'll track their steps in our Smart Sheet tool that we have. But then they also scan it, and Binex Now gets that data as well. But to answer your question, they all have to be fully trained and certified by Binex Now and the Texas Department of Emergency Management, but they don't have to be a medical professional. But the only people on campus that we're allowing to do this is those people who we have their certification on file here at the home office.
Okay, thanks, Lonnie.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Lonnie, appreciate it. Next on our agenda, Mr. Chair, is our consent items. And we have these consent items listed on the agenda. I will pull up here real quick.
1 through 9.
Consent items 1 through 9, yes, sir. And these are all consent items that you see every year through the course of the year. So if you don't have any question on any of these, we're asking that you approve consent items 1 through 9.
Right. Do I hear a motion to approve consent items? Well, assuming there are no questions. Do I hear a motion to approve consent items 1 through 9?
So moved.
Thank you, Joe. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Marvin. Does anybody object? All right, consent items 1 through 9 pass unanimously. And we're moving on to separate items. Is it Robert?
All right, we have one item here that Robert's going to talk about: purchasing and financing the purchase of properties in McAllen and Weslaco.
All right, so thank you guys. Good morning. We have 2 properties that we'd like to get board approval on today. So taking a look at and just quickly kind of giving you a quick overview of what we're looking at here today. We have 70, actually 80, across the state of Texas and Arkansas. We have 80 properties that we currently have in our real estate portfolio. 51 of those are currently leased, and 26 of those are owned properties. And then we also have a couple of office properties here in Louisville and one in Church. So what we look at when these properties that are in our real estate portfolio come up for renewal, both of these 2 properties that we'll talk about today are coming up as sites we already currently have open. The TCPA campus, the Edinburgh Classical campus is open, and we're currently leasing from a church. We also have a facility that the second we'll talk about here in a minute is the Premier High School of FAR that's been leasing a facility there for quite some time. So when these properties come up for renewal on the leases, we try to start looking to see, okay, what are our options out there as far as being able to find something that's more financially feasible that we can move into. So these are just opportunities that end up coming up as we start to look out there. In our real estate software, we have it set up to where we get notices of things that are coming up out there that would be, you know, ideal properties for us to be able to look at when they come on the market. So we have it set up to where we're getting these notices when these things come up. So on both of these two properties, these were former VOTEC schools in the valley that came up for sale. The VOTEC college that was in both of these two locations ended up closing down. So the opportunity came up for us to take a look at both of these two properties for us to look at the possibility of moving a couple of our schools from their current locations. So the first property I believe we're going to talk about is the West Laco property that currently the Premier High School that's in FAR will relocate to West Laco. The students will be able to have that opportunity to go from the Premier High School of FAR, either relocate over to West Laco, or they'll also have the opportunity there. We have an Edinburgh CTE campus that's also close by. Those students would either be able to move into that location, which is just a few miles away, or to this new West Laco location that's down the road. So as you can see, this is the outside of the building here. It is just a tick under 20,000 square feet. It sits on 3.7 acres. And the sales price of this is at $58 a square foot with everything all included. So it's when we try to see these kind of properties come available, these are ideal situations for us to look at because they're already kind of built out as school locations. This already has classroom space. Sometimes it comes with furniture. So these are ideal situations for us to jump on as school business, because it limits the amount of money that we would have to put into the location to get it ready to be able to operate a school. So so you can see from the pictures you're seeing here, and you also have on the next slide, just kind of the breakdown of the expenses. And you can see for this property here in West Laco, we're recommending approval, that the board approve it. It's $1,150,000, $58 a square foot. We will have some site improvements that we'll need to make to the property. You know, we're running on our new constructions like Granbury. You know, we're running anywhere from $180 a square foot to $225 a square foot on new construction. So if you look at a property like this at $58 a square foot, it's a steal of a deal to get the property. The acreage, by the way, is already included in that square foot cost as well. So you've got the acreage in there. And then, we're probably going to spend somewhere between $18 and $20 a square foot for some, improvements to, fire alarm, security, closing off the front, lobby for security purposes. So if we spend, $15 to $20 a square foot, we're still considerably way under, what we would spend if we were to, to construct a new property or even to lease. If you look under the current status, we're currently paying in the lease, the actual debt service for this property would be about half of what we're currently paying in the lease. So when these opportunities come up in our portfolio to move them from a leased property to an owned, property in our portfolio, we're gonna jump on those kind of opportunities and bring those to the board. So that's West Laco there.
Okay, just pause for a second.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Robert, so the estimated cost to buy the building is the $1 million? Or
It's
is
$1
that
million, yes, sir, $1,150,000.
Right. And then will you come back again for the improvements, or is that something you don't have to come back for?
The reason we didn't list the improvements on here, this has been one of those issues in the past. At this point in time, we're continuing to do our due diligence on that. We've got some numbers that I just received just a couple of days ago on the tenant improvements that we'll need to make. The team was there last week doing the assessments on the property. I believe the numbers, as I'd mentioned, are probably going to be somewhere in the $18 to $20 a square foot. The things that we'll need to do to the building, fix an air conditioner, do some updates to the fire alarm, security things, things like that. So you could,
and if the board's okay, we can go back and we can add it as a consent item as we come back with those additional costs.
That's fine.
yeah, that's when we get those numbers more solidified.
I'm trying to do the math. What's the square footage?
About 20,000 square feet. So if you're looking at $18 a square foot, you're going to be what, 500 to 600,000 that you might have to spend on tenant improvements, on fire, things like that.
20,000 square feet at $20 is 400,000. So
yeah. So
okay. Yeah, I'm just curious. The one thing I was going to, and then leading to a question that the blue awnings and the stuff that's on the side of the building, we're going to brand the building, right? Premier, and it's going to look nice like that. I'm big into the brand thing, and I love what you guys have done with school when you brand it. Hopefully you're including that in the.
Yes, and we've been having some conversations about that as well, as to what is that, signage and branding and colors, and what does it look like as far as paint in the lobby and signs in the lobby and signs outside and things like that. So I know Chris has been working on that with the brand superintendents as well.
So yes, you'll see, this blue will become red. You'll see the brand with these buildings.
All right, good. And it's just we've come a long way from the schools and the places that we leased and what they look like to now what we're buying. I get to drive by the Flower Mound schools, the two schools that we have in Flower Mound, and just think they're beautiful buildings that just really cry out, this is a place where you want to send kids. It's safe. It looks good. You must get a good education because it looks so good. So we continue that.
Yes, sir. And we want to be accurate with the numbers that we're bringing to you guys. So as we get those numbers in, we've made some estimates in the past that, maybe either too much or too little. We want to make sure we give you accurate numbers that you're proving on, tenant improvements. There are some modifications to get it ready for a school building that we have to comply with depending on where it's located. So we want to make sure we get those, and I want to be able to have an opportunity to review those costs and make sure we're bringing the accurate costs to you for approval on those things. So
great.
Second.
Sorry, just one last thing, Robert. I got to step out for a minute. Chuck, can you got it from here?
Yep.
And
thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so that's the one, and then I believe we're going to take this as one motion, Chuck. So we'll go on to the next property in Edinburgh Classical Academy is the next property. Edinburgh, Texas is one of the top 20 fastest growing mid-sized cities in the U.S. As you can see, a lot of expansion in this area. We already have a school open nearby that has about 150 students in Edinburgh Classical. And we're limited on our growth in the current facility that we have, limited on our growth. This facility here, which was also a former VOTEC school, will be able to increase our potential enrollment to over 500. So again, you can look at, you can see the facilities. There's a few pictures that you can see there. It's already divided up into classrooms. There will be some work we'll need to do again to update it with, to make sure we have a cafeteria for the kiddos to eat in and things like that. But this is also a very, very good deal. If you go to the next slide there, that kind of breaks down the cost. We're asking the board's approval to purchase this property as well. to move it from lease to an owned property would be $3.2 million. It's running about $98 a square foot. So that includes the land, by the way, as well. So just, I want to point that out, that it's actually land included in that. So the value of the land in these areas is almost as much, as what the entire property, is worth there. So
your current lease is the same as what the mortgage will be, but you're going to increase from around 150 to, you're saying capacity is 500?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. It may be slightly less than that because we may have to take a couple of classrooms out to be able to put in a cafeteria area so they can.
But we're going to be able to triple our size.
Absolutely, yes. Yep. So what the same of what you're paying right now, even if we double inside, would more than cover that mortgage or that debt service.
And can I just make one point, Robert, while we're here on this slide, is that both of these properties, we are expecting, assuming the board approves it, that both of these properties would end up as part of the bond. And so that initial cash investment would basically come back to the organization, and we would finance it, if we were looking at today's rates, at around 3%. So a little bit better than you're actually seeing here. So just to note that as part of this overall understanding.
Yes. Yep. So with that, Chuck, I'd turn it back to you. Are you going to ask for the vote? I'll turn it back to you. So take a vote on that, and then we'll move into the next discussion item.
Marvin, do you want to take over for Ben while he's on this call and walk us through a vote? You're on mute right now. Looks like I don't think I can take you off mute.
There we go. Yes. Okay, so we're ready for a motion for the purchase of both of these properties. Is that correct?
That's our recommendation to the board. Yes, sir.
Okay. I move that we accept these properties, the purchase of these properties as presented. Do we hear a
second?
Okay, motion made and second. Any objections? Okay, motion carried unanimously. Okay, Chuck, I guess you're ready for the next thing.
All right, well, thank you all for that. We are going to spend a few more minutes today, and Robert's going to talk through the 5-year growth plan. We mentioned that last time. Hopefully you had some time to think about that. He's gonna bring up, I think he has some questions for today that we've been talking about that we would like insight from you as a board as to what you would like to see. So Robert, are you wanting me to let you share your screen, or are you?
If you could let me share, let me kind of just start with the talking points, Chuck. I'll just run real quickly through some of the talking points here of where we're at, just so you guys can kind of have an idea of where we're at in the process. We had the strategic plan that the board approved back in 2016, and let me just go ahead and share that. I can share it while we're in the process of talking about it, so you know exactly what am I talking about. So
as you can imagine, there's a lot of data, and what we would like, two things today is from you. One is, what would you like to see? So we're not giving you too much data. And then of course you can always drill down if you want. And then second is, give us any insight into some things from your expertise, your experience, that you would advise us we need to be looking at. Doesn't have to all be on this board call today. You as individuals can reach out to us as well. We can walk through this. And again, you can give us advice in a separate setting if you would like.
So Chuck, are you seeing the strategic plan now? You're seeing the
Yes.
You can see it, okay. So, over the years, as we've talked about, we have strategic projects that we're thinking through, which a lot of the strategic projects are related around, two of our brands, the Premier High School and then also the Founders Classical Academy. And, the last since 2016, starting in 17, we continued to have strategic projects that we were in the process of purchasing land for, and then building phase 1. And then some of these also, we've already completed building out phase 2. So we have two types of projects. One we just went over with a couple of the projects you just saw. We have a lot of these organic projects that come up that are in the general course of doing business with our portfolio of sites that we have. As I'd mentioned, we have about 80 locations across all of our brands and our office complexes that we have. So in the general course of doing business, there are things that come up that are good deals for us as an organization, and we want to be able to bring those things to the board, and we kind of capture those in what we call the organic things that happen. They're just things that happen in the course of doing business. And then we have these other strategic items that relate to significant amount of money that we're projecting with the bonds, and the bonds that we've done. We've done 2 bond issues in the past. We're at the last board meeting, we talked about the 3rd bond that we're looking at right now, which if I can switch over real quickly, this is what we were talking about at the last meeting with the bond offerings. And a lot of these projects that we have in this 3rd bond offering that we're looking at are projects that have already happened. And most of these have already been, constructed. We do have a couple of them on here that would be new constructions that are going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months. But for the most part, a lot of these projects have already happened. So as we continue to develop this out, and just as a quick reminder, for this 3rd bond, we were looking at about 150 million on that bond. That may go down just a little bit because since we've met at the last board meeting, we've had some more discussions about, which I'm going to go into here in just a second, maybe moving the Round Rock construction from to open in 2022 to open in 2023. So why did we move that project? We're in the process of developing a new Founders Classical design. We've been tweaking on the square footage. We had a property that was about 105,000 square foot, and we're trying to look at ways to be more conservative in how we build that out. So we've been designing that property back to about 85,000 square feet. We've had some meetings with stakeholders, some of our campus directors, to get some stakeholder input and review from them on what these are campus directors that are already running schools, to get their feedback on, hey, we've built a couple of schools. What are you running into now that we've built a couple of these schools? What are some of the issues you're running into? Things that we need to take into consideration. So we've now got that input, and we're working through that with what's the square footage going to be. So as we continue to look at projects for the future, we pretty much have the projects nailed down for 2022. Those projects are in the pipeline right now and are in process of being built out, or land's already been bought. And we have a couple of projects for 23 in Denton and the Round Rock property that we've already purchased property for as well. So we're also looking at, in this new development, as we continue to evolve as an organization, we have the brand superintendents over each of these areas that are now getting more involved. So we're getting these brand superintendents more involved to help us with the research that's being conducted on where should we be going as far as new locations. There is a lot of data that we need to be able to review and need to be able to put into a business plan that like ISD performance and analysis of areas where we would be able to put the schools and where the need would be. So we are in the process of doing that, some of that research and analysis on ISDs, demographic studies, as we've mentioned in the past. You know, we have this Buxton score and the Buxton model that we use to, you know, what we did a couple of years ago and we're in the process of updating now is we can take all of our student population that we currently have in all of our founders classicals, and we can pinpoint, you know, the addresses of where those students live and what those households, the incomes of those households, how many kids they have in those households. We can do that research and plug in from our Buxton model. We can create and update a model so that we can then, when we look to go into a new location like Houston, let's say West Houston area, we can plug that same demographic data and model into that area to say, would this be a good area? Is there, you know, is population growing in that area? Would this be a good place for us to look to put future sites? So there's a lot of work that we're going into that future growth analysis with Buxton, demographics, ISD studies, all of that in addition to working on making adjustments to the model. Those things are very important data points that keep us from being able to really nail down the exact cost of the buildings, what we project coming between 23 and 28. So we're continuing to work on what those locations will look like, where they'll look like in 23 through 28. We'll be coming back to you later on those. In addition, we're also looking at, as we continue to do all this data research with the districts and the Buxton models and the real estate data, growth and models in these areas in all over the state of Texas where we have the major markets are what we're looking at. So Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin areas, those major markets are the ones we're really focusing on. But we're also doing and mapping historical data on our projected staffing patterns. So looking at what our staffing patterns have been in the past, both at the administrative level and at the campus level, doing historical research on that, plugging that into our data sheets that we have on our historical data for staffing, and then also looking at what those patterns, projecting what those patterns would look like as we go forward, down the road. So all of that data kind of plugs into where we at and how do we project out for you for the future bonds. Once we get past this third bond in a year or two, we're going to have another bond that would come behind that with projects as well. So with that, Chuck, I would turn back to you to kind of add to that. That's a quick overview, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts now?
So we wanted to get your thoughts as board members. And again, like I said, we can do some of this outside of a board meeting with you individually, but do you have any thoughts as we talked about this last board meeting and then we've talked about a little today? Do you have any input for us today? What you would like to see, how much is enough? And then you could drill down if you want more. But y'all want to kind of go around and each one of you kind of give us any kind of input or questions you have? If so, Joe, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. I think it's, pretty thorough, clearly. The one thing as I look at it that might be a little bit helpful, is to try to get an idea of just kind of overall, what is the addressable market and which are the priority sites that we have. I know you have the Buxton score in there, which is very helpful. But at the same time, maybe just like a comprehensive overall, here the addressable market, be it however many of them there are. Here's where we're looking to move first, second, third, fourth, and realizing, I think you mentioned, organic growth. It's not going to come that way because, deals come up and it might be, The first one that comes around is in the bottom quartile, but it's just such a good deal that it makes sense to move, but at the same time, have an overall comprehensive picture with, prioritization. Because it looks like we've got it by year, but hopefully that makes some sense.
No, it
That's
does.
just an idea.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Kent?
Yeah, I was just thinking similar as Joe there on the priorities. How do you create the priorities, what the order of importance is? And it makes sense, Robert, what you're saying. Sometimes you're strategic, sometimes you're opportunistic. And so you just have to leave some space in our funds and in our plan for those opportunistic times. So I like that part of the plan. Man, it's a lot. I think the priority piece helps in the sense of, as the numbers get bigger, sometimes you start thinking, okay, where if things go south a little bit, where are we going to put the resources to maximize the results in that? And so the priority helps me as well.
Okay. To give you the latest on Prosper will be opening in August of 21. So this next 6 months from now. And the latest I heard, Robert, I don't know if you have new numbers, but we're at 1,000. Well, we're about 800 that have applied for seats at Prosper. And Prosper is maybe 5 miles from Frisco, where they have 1,000 on that waiting list. So it's pretty exciting. You think of the demand out there.
Yeah. Hey, Chuck or Robert, so what is driving all of that demand? Because you think, what point do you saturate the market, and where is the demand going to continue to come? So, man, what's driving that kind of demand?
Well, I think I'll let James and Robert chime in, but I think you're in these high growth school districts where there's just so many people moving here, so many houses being built, that you're going to be in overcrowded schools, good schools, quality schools, but they're overcrowded regardless. And so that's one part. But then there's the second part is just school choice in general, people wanting options, being able to make a decision. And then third is the program itself. When we're talking about founders, we're talking about a different curriculum than what they have at the local district.
Yeah, and it's, I get a lot of people are moving to Texas. It's a lot of people from different states are moving to Texas because it's such a great, state economically. So, and we're so far from saturation of the market. Charters are only pulling in, and I know, Chuck, you probably know the data, but it's what, 5% of the market
Statewide, right? And
statewide. So
you have some cities where it's getting 15 to 20%, but these suburban areas, we're there's one or two other smaller single site operators that are in some of these suburban areas, but for the most, I think we're the only CMO that is going into suburban markets, a larger operator.
And with the different models we're developing out, we have the ability to build, something smaller. We can go with a 2-section school. We can go with just an elementary and not a high school. Or another thing we're talking about is having 2 elementaries feeding into 1 high school. That's another scenario that we're looking at, and as we move into a new market. So there's a lot of different options of how we can develop out that future, and then focusing, utilizing that data for where, new home construction, Denton out there where Denton is right now, you would drive by and you would think, with the Denton location, seems like it's out in the middle of nowhere at this point, but there's, literally thousands of new homes that are on tap for new construction over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's just continuing.
You do what districts are doing, which is you buy the land. That's your only risk, is the land itself. Yeah. And then just wait 5 years and build on it. But we are nervous about it. It is something we are not just jumping headlong into this because of the Buxton data, and you can see the growth. There's two other operators that are more aggressive. One of them is now at, I think, 50,000 students in Texas, IDEA, and IL Texas. Both of them, IL Texas, which is smaller, but they've had rapid growth. They're biting off in 4 new buildings for 1,500 kids in places they've never been. And so Frisco was our first location that we didn't have anything, within 15 miles that we could say, okay, we're going to pull from, like with Flower Mound, you're going to pull from Louisville. So we are being very conservative still. There's people, Wyatt's joined us as CFO. He's coming from IDEA, and he's like, hey, you could do all these other things. You could issue a, $500 million bond. And so we are being very conservative. I know some of these meetings, you may not see that because we're just asking to buy and finance buildings every time. But we are still being very conservative on how we do this. Lance, what thoughts do you have?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I've having seen this information now for a few years, I feel like it really does capture expansion under circumstances that we've learned from history, right? We know how to do this, the model works, and you can really very confidently analyze the various factors to prioritize and have a lot of confidence in a plan like this. I guess the question that comes to mind when I think about this being created in 2016 and everything that's happened since is what are the factors that potentially undermine all of the assumptions in this detail? For example, I guess the biggest example is what's the new normal under COVID in a couple of years that will change any of the assumptions on this chart. Even cost assumptions. I think about what happens when the state of Texas puts in effect new requirements for ventilation in every public building, and how does that impact our ability to expand under this? So maybe all of that's factored in somewhere, and but that's the kind of detail I think would be really interesting and helpful for us to consider is what's really changed or we expect to change since 2016 and the assumptions that have been built into this based upon our historical knowledge.
Yep. We were concerned, as every industry, about COVID. We delayed opening delayed opening 2 of the 3 schools. We proceeded with Prosper, and we put in a holding pattern, Round Rock and Conroe, for that very reason, not knowing what was going to happen with the state economy. So now we're looking at it with a year of COVID, and of course, no one knows where it's going, and is it going to, the numbers just balloon again with these variants coming from other countries? But in general, I think you're hearing everybody saying, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine. So our economy in Texas should not get worse than what we've gone through. And that's what the comptroller, that's how he feels as well. So there's less concern on our part now about is the FSP, the Foundation School Program number, going to go down significantly, more than 5%? Doesn't look like it. So that was our first concern, is what's going to happen. We got to consider getting cuts in state funding. The other issues you're talking about relate, and I know you're talking about any risk and all risk, but one example is COVID, ventilations. We are taking into account kind of the current, probably future view of like the way the bathrooms are designed for more of a unisex type of layout than having male, female bathrooms. We've already kind of built that. We have built that into these new models. We obviously don't have all the answers as to what's out there. Even with stuff like ventilation, the way the feds are starting to talk about it, and the money that may be coming in the stimulus packages versus Texas and what Texas is going to require. We're cognizant of that and staying somewhere in the middle, knowing, you know, there will be future Texas administrations that have other views. So we're cognizant of that up to the point of, you know, where we currently can be with what the science is and what people are signing. Other things, Robert, that you are considering? I know the bathrooms is a big thing.
Yeah, again, one thing is we talked about, we got some stakeholder input from some of the campus directors and how the building gets used, and cafeteria space. Do we, being able to move a certain number of kids, through the cafeteria spaces. So we're looking at that. And how do you move more kids through the cafeteria, at the timeframes you have. So really trying to make sure we're utilizing, we don't have any wasted space. We're not building in a lot of wasted space, and we're utilizing it to the best degree we have. And the other thing I'd mention, Chuck, too, which you might want to talk more about too, we're talking here, this is one area of the business, which is the brick and mortar business as well, but there's also the virtual. And I think this year we've seen a lot of growth on the virtual side. So even though we may not be getting as many students here on this, in the brick and mortar side, which most likely there's going to be the need for brick and mortar probably for the rest of our lifetime, but we also do have the virtual option that in a situation like COVID, which is something that a lot of our competitors don't have that ability to be able to move kids into a virtual option and still be able to have that funding stream through the virtual option. What are your thoughts on that, Chuck?
Yeah, and of course, a lot of that goes back to, is there going to be a cut in funding? If there's no cut in funding, which doesn't look like it's going to be much, your funds to then be able to build the building, we're trying to stay around the 15% mark or lower. We're going to be able to build the buildings even if you got to a point where 50% of the kids are actually wanting to come to a building. Now, we're not seeing that. Where we have these large buildings, we're seeing 80% plus coming to school. But we're cognizant, which is why the second reason we didn't jump out there and build all three, even though we had approval, was for this very reason. What's going to happen? What's the new normal? Which none of us really know. So we're being conservative on not jumping out there too far, we think. Any other thoughts y'all have as board members around what Lance is mentioning? Let's talk about that for a few minutes. Is there anything you would throw out there as for consideration we need to be considering as the new normal? Ventilation, of course, bathrooms. Marvin, we can't hear you.
How's our security doing?
Security, we have, I think we introduced you to Steve Cheney, former kind of second in charge in Maryland State Police. So we have at least, Robert, is at least half of our, well, about 40% of our buildings, we have cameras built out now. We've got cameras installed.
Yeah, it's, I think he said 24 right now, 24, 25. And we're continuing every week to bring more and more of those online. So we have the security, which covers, we can actually sit here at our desk now and see all of the entry points to every one of the schools, so the lobbies, and every one of the entry and exit points of the schools right now. So,
and then of course, the more important is as you build the buildings out, you have best practices built into the buildings themselves with the comment, the area between the actual entry to the school and where the receptionist is.
Yeah, what you mentioned when you were talking about the Premier, the first school, and buying that property, is that one of the costs would be to have that security area kind of like you have at the office area before people can actually get into the school, which is good. You know, as long as somebody's not just hitting the buzzer, letting people in, rubber stamping it.
Right. So that's, we're definitely in a better place where we build the buildings, yes, and then retrofitting other locations.
Yeah, and Steve has done a good job of doing the assessments of the locations. So all of the locations, I believe he's been in most, if not, he's probably been in 90% of them. To where he's able to assess those situations and entry, exit points, locks on doors. If there needed to be any repairs, we've done some repairs on some of those things. You know, making sure we've and then also doing staff training. He's been doing some professional development and staff training on how to deal with, you know, situations that may come up in the course of, you know, running the schools. So.
And if you could just convince Steve to stop being an Eagles or a Ravens fan, that would be fine.
Right. He runs around with those jackets on, hoodies.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes, sir.
Or Robert, kind of an add-on question here, maybe just thinking about just the strategic plan overall. And so you kind of covered the facilities here and the finances with the bond issues and the demand from the students. Is there a similar plan for for staff to be able to find staff? And is there that availability for the people it's going to take to run these? So you guys have do you have a similar sheet for people's side of this? What are you looking at on that?
It's not as pretty. It doesn't have a lot of color, but that's this one here. And of course, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, this is where, you know, we're going backwards now to see if we can collect this data. And some of it we were collecting and broken out in certain ways. You know, we started collecting it now. Kent, so we started collecting it and breaking it down, you know, by brand. And we're wanting to go back. That's one of the things I was mentioning. We want to go back in here now and see if we can plug in those historical data so that we can utilize the historical data to then project forward. What do we think for the brands based on what we're wanting to do and the staff we would need to do that. And then, you know, based on what do we project the growth to be over, you know, over, we're currently projecting a 12%, you know, that could go up or down, but projecting about a 12% growth. But we also have the staffing for the home office. We've broken it down by divisions and trying to look at how do we, you know, the efficiency of the administrative staff, being able to get this number to continue to go down percentage-wise over the years as we continue to grow, so that we're basically being more efficient. So we're not having to grow at quite the rate we were growing over the last, you know, last few years. Hopefully we can be more efficient. So this is something we're looking at. Again, more work is still continuing to happen with this, but definitely taking a look at that. Yes.
And it's really a challenge because there's not a lot like us in educational industry, at least. There's not a lot like us that we can go look at, you know, historicals, best practice from other people doing it. So if you try to go look at a school district just in one geographic area, they're not spread across the whole state, 2 states. So we're moving from a comparison to school districts with 20,000 kids or 25,000 kids, and we're looking at school districts that have 70 or 80 or 90 campuses, which makes more sense to kind of what we're doing. And that puts us looking at districts that are from 50 to 90,000 kids. But they would have, you know, 70 campuses. They have 70 campus directors, headmasters, 70 locations. But again, they're not spread over, you know, they're usually in 1 or 2 cities, if that, you know, they're in 1 city, or maybe they spread out a couple of cities like LISD, Louisville ISD. What thoughts do y'all have as board members? Anything you could advise us from your experience that we might be able to glean from and pull into our industry?
One of the bigger ones that I could tell you is just don't piss off your regulators. That's a gift that keeps on.
Amen.
I mean, you guys are doing a great job. One area that I get concerned about, and I know we're being recorded, but I think, it's the financials, generally speaking, is we're building, we're buying, we're borrowing a lot of money. And I like to see the fact that the growth in revenue is continuing, but as we increase that debt number, one of the things that we're very focused on, and if you see, just if we're comparing to industries, we're very focused, and I believe US Bank is very focused and does a very good job of this, is what's our expense ratio? And our number is astronomically high right now, and our margins are really low. And I think, just our effort is we have to deliver education to kids. We got to have good buildings that are safe for them to be in, as well as our teachers, that have safe parking lots, safe entrances to the schools. The way they get into the parking lot as a whole is important. All that stuff, but we do have to make sure that we're not spending, more money than we're making, of course. And you guys do a great job of that. But that's one area that we want to make sure that we keep that gap pretty wide between revenue and the amount that we owe. And that's one thing I've learned as from my industry.
We obviously don't want to get down to our covenants with our bond, with S&B and with our bond issuers, the bond owners. So James, I think that is like 1.1 times. And then we've been like as high as 2 something.
Yeah, we've been over 3 even, but we've typically been in the high 2s. And
I guess that's coming down as we start building new ones like Frisco and Prosper, where we don't have any revenue. So what are you shooting for, James?
So we're going to say above 1.5 for our debt service coverage ratio, and that is basically the standard for a BBB flat rated organization, is to stay above that 1.5 ratio.
What's the standard for a BBB plus?
I
understand there's limitations for us getting there, but what is it? If you don't know, it's all right.
Well, it's because it's multiple factors, and so it's not just that. But obviously it's if you're slightly higher, so if we're saying above 1.7, 1.8, then that's gonna put us in that next category. But there's cash on hand, there's growth expectation, there's it's obviously multiple factors. I know you're very aware of that, Ben, that we have to get into in relation to.
And like I said, I think we're doing a great job with this. It's just to keep it front of mind, and you got a few. So I think everybody's kind of got their pulse on that, anyways. So a finger on the pulse of it. So.
Well, I think bringing Wyatt on board, especially while we're expanding out and looking with this significant growth, helps with his experience in just the quick growth of IDEA and how they have built out. He comes with some new and different thoughts and experience in that area, and gives us a little bit of wisdom from his experience and just in managing managing the numbers basically as we go forward. So I think that's part of his hiring. I think that's a solid benefit to us.
Good.
Lance, did you have anything else?
This would be a subject for another day, but we have 2 sides as a company. You have your product, and then you have your sales. That's not exactly true in a company like this, but there's at least a metaphor to be drawn there. And what we've looked at today is in essence the sales side, right? It's the delivery of our product out to the market, and how aggressively we can do that, and thoughtfully we can do that. But the other side I think about often is just the product itself, And I'd be really interested to have a conversation about the strategic plan for continuing to improve our product, be leaders in education, R&D, publication, thought leadership. How do we make sure that our product stays really relevant, cutting edge? I know you guys think a lot about that too. And to me, that's the other half of the strategic plan. It'd be interesting to talk about.
It's sad if you owned Sears or JCPenney's or somebody's stock, but it is helpful to all of us to be cognizant of. It could easily become that if you don't watch it.
Right.
Marvin, do you have anything else?
I cut my sound so that the phone doesn't interfere, and so sorry about that. No, I was just thinking about how our country is going further and further away from free enterprise and capitalism and patriotism, and how I'm thinking in the terms of the education of the students, and that we need to really be focused on that as well as all these other things.
It's true. Which you approved as a board, our mission, tweaking our mission statement a couple of years ago to have civics and moral education at its core. And that's a huge part of that third point of parents, the program itself, the curriculum itself, what we're offering, why they choose it. But to Lance's point, how do we balance, you got a classical system where they don't want a lot of change per se. They want to go back to classical education. And then you have STEM and early college and premiers and virtual, where you have to change, you have to be doing things. I mean, they all need to be considered and tweaked. But to your point, what's our core purpose? And that's around that moral and civics piece.
Right.
Well, thank y'all for this discussion. We want to do more of these on board meetings. We will actually be working on getting you some questions, some big questions for you to consider before board meetings, that we can do more of this, because it's been very helpful to us. That is it on the discussion item about strategic 5-year growth, unless somebody has something else. Ben, I think we're done with this meeting if you want to adjourn the meeting.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, thank you. It was a good discussion. I'm sorry I missed out on the vote and the second property that you guys were looking at, but
and it's 12:14.
Definitely good discussion. Yeah, so this meeting is adjourned at 12:14 p.m. And thank you for your discussion.
All right, let me stop recording.